Hello and welcome to the Measured Golf Podcast. This is the very first episode, formerly the Force Plate Guy podcast. And the reason for the rebrand is we are trying to move past the world of talking solely about ground reaction forces, force plates, and all of that fun stuff. And we want to continue to take a deeper dive into the golf swing, golf performance, and how we get there and connect the two. So, with that being said, measured golf kind of serves that purpose in terms of being more holistic in its approach to golf performance. So that's why you're seeing a slight change in name with it going from the Force Plate Guy to the Measured Golf Podcast. And in our inaugural episode, we are very, very lucky because we have a very special guest. His name is Ryan Holley, and he, I think, is a Canadian version of myself. I think that somehow I was actually probably born in Canada and somehow we were separated at the hospital, but we have found one another, and he is definitely a force plate extraordinaire. I would go as far as to call him a force plate guy as well. He definitely has had tremendous success helping people identify, solutions to their problems by being able to help them understand how their body's moving and how forces and torques are being exchanged between the body and the ground. So the really cool thing about Ryan, and one of the biggest reasons I wanted to have him on, is because not only has he had amazing success, but he also shares a very similar journey to myself in terms of why he believes in ground reaction forces and teaching from that perspective, and also where he's been able to really find some application and help some of the best players in the world, including Nick Taylor, Tony Finau, JJ Spawn, and a few others. And if all that isn't interesting enough, it turns out he's also a mega Pearl Jam fan, as am I. So any friend of Eddie is a friend of mine. So I'm always happy to maybe, digress a little into a Pearl Jam tangent at some point in the podcast if it really breaks down. So without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome our good friend, Mr. Nick Holley. What's going on, my man?
Hey, good man. What's happening?
Nothing much,
Good to be
man.
on, and yeah, good to be on and talk it up a little bit, and
Did I call you Nick Holly? You're not Nick Holly. You're Ryan Holly. Sorry about that.
I'll go by anything, man. That's all right. That's
I've
all
only
right.
got half this Starbucks in me so far. Sorry, man.
No worries. No worries. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited. I'm happy for you for the rebrand, and looking forward to hearing kind of some of your future guests and see what's going on.
Yeah, man, it's really exciting times. It's been a great year, and if we're gonna kind of look back at the year, I think we would be remiss to not talk about probably one of the most popular stories on the PGA Tour this year. I think something happened up in Canada. What was that? It's Canada, so we us Americans aren't always paying attention.
Man, to steal Nick's line, I think I just blacked out. I'm not quite sure. It was an amazing story up here for sure. Having Nick win the National Open for the first time in 69 years. And, I talked to some folks down, I was down at the US Open the following week and, chatting to some folks from the Canadian golf scene down there. We all agreed it was awesome to watch him win. Like it was amazing. It was great for him, great for the country, but the style and the way that he won that golf tournament, I, I
He
don't,
won
I
that
can't
golf
remember a
tournament.
better finish. I can't remember a better finish
Yeah, he
outside of a
won that
major
golf tournament.
championship for sure. And I mean, it was just, I mean, I've seen that highlight, I don't know, a couple hundred times by now, probably up here. And it never fails to bring a smile to my face. Right. And I mean, like, obviously, like I don't do putting or anything with Nick, but just to have that small involvement in that moment. I mean, it's something that for my career, I mean, like I'll always remember. It's definitely the highlight for me. Watching that puck go in, which funny enough, I did in a parking lot, construction parking lot in Edmonton on my phone. I happened to be at a really nice private club in Edmonton for a couple of days, and I was wrapping up my day as Nick was finishing, packing up all my gears. Tommy's coming down the stretch, and it was the first day that this new clubhouse, had been opened at this golf course. So they had been done this like 2 year reno project, and they had just started serving food that morning that I was there. They had no TVs in the building. So I was like, okay, I got to go find a bar or a restaurant or something. And I get out onto the road and the playoff is starting. So I just pull into a construction zone thinking it's going to be like a 1 hole playoff. Well, 4 holes later, I'm still there watching it on my phone. And it was awesome. It was
Did
awesome.
you kind of sit there awestruck and watch, or did you kind of like lose it a little bit? Like what was the emotions like having to sit there and watch it on your phone? Like
It
walk me
was
through
nerve
sitting
wracking.
in your car watching this four-hole playoff because I got to like I would be going nuts.
Yeah, man, it was nerve wracking for sure. I put the phone on do not disturb. I think I texted about two people back during that 45-minute window or whatever it was. Nerve wracking. I mean, I just reacted. I mean, blacked out basically, but like my hat came off and threw it across the car, and it was awesome. But to be 100% honest, I was way more nervous for him when he was coming down the stretch at the Waste Management Open back in early February, like on Super Bowl Sunday,
Yeah,
um, because it was earlier on in our relationship, and I wasn't as sure that he had what I wanted him to have at in that golf tournament.
right,
So I was a lot more nervous there. I knew that he was going to do his job, quote unquote,
right,
coming down the stretch of the Open.
right.
I knew he was fine. I knew he knew what I wanted him to do. I knew he was playing really good golf. We had a session the Friday before he left for Toronto, in which we talked about it, that he was ready to win. That his golf swing was as good as it's ever been. It was as repeatable as it's ever been. His movement pattern was spot on to what I wanted it to be, and we knew that something good was coming. And he shot 75 on the Thursday. And, we had a text conversation that night, and I was like, yo, bro, like, what the hell?
Right.
Um, and he basically said, he's like, listen, I made a couple of messes. He's like, if a couple putts go in, we're going to be in good shape. And sure enough, he goes like 21 under par over his next like 54 holes or something like that, sets a course record and wins the Open. But yeah, it was super fun. I mean, I know that, working with good players, oftentimes we're going to feel stressed that they maybe don't.
Yeah.
Um, I think being a little bit closer to that level of golf now, I appreciate how good those guys are way more because they
Yeah.
are human beings. They battle trauma like the rest of us, right? Like, for
Amen.
me, I'm not the best driver of the golf ball, not because my technical skill set is bad, but because I don't play a lot of
Toast.
golf. I play like once a week, and man, like, yeah, like up in my brain is like not
It's
where people
actually
want to
funny you
live.
say that. So one of the guests I got coming up for the podcast is Dr. Allison Kurt, and
Mm,
that's exactly what she handles, right? Is EMDR training, and it's helping
yeah,
people with these small keys that they don't really realize that they're kind of wrapping around themselves when they play golf. And it is, man, it's stressful. And the thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is, you know, there were periods of time where the guy in the red shirt was walking around golf courses and people were telling him he was a bum. The gallery used to call Tiger a bum. Like,
yeah,
hey man, you didn't win this last week. Like, you suck. Like, what's wrong
yeah,
with you? Why aren't you winning? Like, the
yeah,
expectation for these guys is just it nobody can achieve enough because sports media and the 24-hour news cycle, man, like they're constantly wanting to anoint the next Jack, the next Tiger, and they build these guys up, man, and we all know it's the same thing that just happened with Colorado, right? We build these
yeah,
guys to the hilt, and then we love to tear it down the minute that they can't live up to it, and
right,
we're constantly moving the goalpost, right? And if you look at the end of the PGA Tour season, right, since we're still talking about kind of this great year that we just witnessed, I mean, if you look at the level of performance, I mean, dude, you could shoot 63 and lose as Xander Schauffele. I
yeah,
mean, that's pretty wild, man. You go Tour Championship Sunday 63 and don't walk away with a trophy. Like, what level are these guys at, man? I mean, it's absurd.
right, right, for sure. I mean, like Hovland shooting 28 on the back at East Lake. I mean, that's insane, right? Like it's absolutely crazy. But that's how good these guys are getting. Not only is the technique getting better, which I think I can say that as a blanket statement. We don't have as many homemade moves on PGA Tour driving ranges as we used to, and if they are homemade moves, players really understand whether you call them matchups or complementary moves or whatever you want to call them.
I
They
want to ask you
understand
a
how their
question.
body moves in space. Yeah,
I want to ask you a question because I
yeah,
think you know this like I know this, right? You get out there on a tour range, right? And let's say you're working with somebody and maybe the relationship's kind of new and maybe you're kind of new to their team and environment. Or let's say that, they're playing well and you've been with them for a little while. Like, it's amazing how many phone numbers I don't recognize I get text messages from that day or that night. You get the same thing out
For
there.
sure.
I mean, I'm sure after Nick, I bet you got like they're very curious, and I don't think that they get enough credit for being willing to really self evaluate and critique themselves and try to turn over every stone to find that, tenth of a stroke that they're missing.
For sure. I mean, I get it on a smaller level because I have not been on a PGA Tour range. Because of what I do, it is done in a very, in the, like, not a lab style setting, but in a vacuum. If I have to be on a tour site, I'm not sure that player is ready to play that week. Typically speaking, because I'm not a coach, right? So you'll see coaches like Joe Mayo over in Europe this weekend
Yep.
for the Ryder Cup. Joe's a really smart guy, obviously
Yep.
working with Hovland in some beautiful ways. And he's there to check up and make sure and whatnot. Because I don't do that stuff, I don't really hang out on ranges. However, the best marketing is how well your players play.
Absolutely.
So
100%.
yeah, like definitely phone calls and text messages from some really good players after the fact. I mean, I'm blessed in the lower mainland of BC. I would say I've worked with 80% of the competitive plus handicap players in
Yeah.
the lower mainland. And that's just simply because, I get a +4 or +5 who wins some golf tournaments, and people are like, man, that dude's smashing it further, or he's hitting it better than I've ever seen him. What's he doing?
Let's
Now,
talk
that
about
being
that.
said, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's well said, right? And I think that the reason that obviously you have an established, way of doing things and have been at this a long time. But, I think one of the other things that really draws better players to both you and me is the fact that we do have the force plate technology, right? And I think a lot of people who are better players, when you go and look at them swing a golf club, like you kind of alluded to earlier, you're not seeing a lot of weird movement patterns out of those guys. Like generally, your better players kind of look like, better players and they kind of move well and swing well and the ball doesn't curve much and all of those things, right? So, I think that the interesting thing is that for most of these guys, I'm going to even say up to a 5. I think that when they go and get a quote unquote normal golf lesson from a normal guy that either works at the club or hangs out at the range or whatever the case may be, generally that better player is apprehensive as they should be because they're a better player and like they found some stuff that works, right? So they're always on guard. And then, depending on the level of expertise of that coach, they don't want to mess with that guy very much because the last thing they want to do is mess up a good player. So I
For
think
sure.
that those guys really have a difficult time finding coaching to get better from that 5 level, down to a plus or whatever the case may be. So I think that where we really have a massive advantage is that we're able to show people things that can't be seen with the naked eye. And I know that, just like, people always like want to, they always say that when people kind of copy you, it's a form of flattery, right? But there's a lot of people who see, hashtag golf biomechanics and hashtag ground reaction forces. And the next thing you know, they're saying that they're a ground reaction force expert, yet they don't have anything to measure pressure or force. So I mean, it's invisible, right? So I think that's what really sets us apart. So, what do you think about the force plates and
Yeah,
work?
for sure. Like I've never been scared to implement change with players, regardless of their level of play, because it's not my opinion. When it's my opinion, I'm terrified,
Yeah,
right?
right.
When I was quote unquote, as you say, a normal coach. So working out on a driving range with, I remember wheeling a cart out that had a
Yeah.
computer and a
Was it a
camera, and
JC video by chance?
it sure was.
Oh,
And
the yellow briefcase.
drawing the lines on the screen and all that
Yeah,
kind of
man.
jazz. I mean, like, that was my best guess. Like it was better than guessing, but it was
Right.
certainly still guessing, right? Obviously 2D versus 3D and all the issues that we run into with video and frame of reference for the player and all that kind of stuff. We run into all those problems. And that I'm terrified. I'm like, that's why I don't do online instruction. Until
Right.
I've seen somebody on plates, I get tons of requests of players. Hey, can you take a look at this? Do you know what this, like, what should I do? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know enough about the player. I don't know enough about their ball flight. I don't have measurables. I don't have how they move. I don't know. And, I have good ideas, but like, you'll know this, like, when I see a player, I try to make a guess at what I'm going to see before I look at the data.
Of
Am I going
course.
to see heavy verticals? Am I going to see good horizontals? What am I going to see? I get it right like 60% of the time, maybe.
Yeah.
That's just not good enough to work with video. Like, it's just
Yeah.
not. Right. Sometimes, like, when we talk about a player who has heavy verticals and they get out of those verticals pretty quickly, we typically will see the leg straighten, right? The lead leg will tend to straighten, even the trail leg will straighten up, but not always. I've had players who keep it bent and like push it off the ground in a bent fashion.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting that I can't get anything right on video. I'm just suggesting that it's not where I'm most comfortable, right?
Let's
So
try this.
again, to your
Let's
better player, yeah, go ahead.
let's try this, right? Like, look, man, I'll throw you out on a range with zero technology, and I'll take my chances. I got faith in you, and like you said, you might not get it right on the first try, but you've got enough tools at your disposal to where if we work at this long enough, we're gonna get it right. So
For
I just
for
want to
sure,
make
it's
sure
just going to
that
take
for the
time.
masses that we're clarifying here.
Yeah,
It's we
for
we
sure.
don't have to have technology to coach. But here's
But
the differentiator, I think,
yeah,
is we are obviously on the spectrum somewhere way high or way low, whichever way you look at it, because the two of us represent two guys that were willing to invest a substantial amount of money. And when I say substantial, I mean like the cost of two TrackMan to buy some force plates. And, we also have a launch monitor, we also have, whatever other tools we've invested in to actually try to get a better understanding of this. So when you say that it's a guess and those things, I think we need to keep in mind that everybody is guessing. Like if they say they're not, they're absolutely lying because everybody is guessing. The difference
for sure.
between what we're trying to say is that we would like to control as many variables as possible within our guesses.
And I would like to get it right as quick as I can. And that's where,
Absolutely.
like, to your point of being out on a driving range with a player, yeah, I can make good change. I shouldn't slight myself like that, but I don't know if I'm going to get it right the first time. I don't know if that feels going to be right the first time.
Right.
I know that, if we're trying to solve whatever the problem is, right, that the ball flight problem,
My
I know what graph needs to move where. And when I see that graph move, I don't care about the result. And that's the problem on the driving range, right? Like, I had a player in, pretty good player yesterday, and he hit like a complete shank and hit my quad. Okay. So it's, a foot ahead of the player and, a foot to the right or a couple of feet to the right. And he's a 4 or 5 handicap, pretty decent ball striker. And he had just the straight up toe shank. Well, he was an early extender who I got him into a little bit better downswing position. That learned behavior kicked in and he early extended and he hit it like literally 50 millimeters off the toe.
yeah.
Okay. Now on the range, he's so embarrassed now for the next 15 or like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a hard time getting him to do anything else. But when I can show him data that says, hey, man, I know the results sucked. Here's why the results sucked. But look at all the stuff I asked you to do that was actually way, way, way better. Well, within a couple of shots, he's back to flushing it. Now on the range, I can't gain that same level of confidence from that player because I don't have the evidence to suggest, hey, I know you hit the worst shot you've hit in 20 years, right? But you did a lot of stuff really, really well.
I 100% agree. Like I really, really do. I mean, I teach indoors. I prefer to teach indoors. I've taught a lot of lessons outdoors. I still teach outdoors from time to time. And the thing I like about the indoor teaching is that there's a couple things. The first is that within my space, I think people don't realize in a simulator, you are kind of fixed in terms of your aim because you're trying to hit the middle of the screen.
Big
So the
time.
thing that is really interesting to me is how many people come in and every one of their balls starts right down Broadway, right down the middle, right? And then curves to the right. And they're like, that's weird. I don't miss shots to the right. And I go, well, that's because you aim left at the range.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Right.
Like, that's why, because you're
Yeah.
target oriented, right? So
Yeah.
long story short, I like the fact that people can actually learn their ball flight a little easier because they can't just manipulate their alignments to their target. The other
For
thing that I
sure.
really love that kind of really goes nicely with what you just said is, you know, I have a lot of players come in, and I'm going to go the opposite way with your story, right? You said you had a guy come in, get nervous. shanks it, hits the quad, right? We've had that happen, of course. But here's another good story, right? What about the guy that comes in and is just putting on a flush show, like just striping everything, right? Like you're like, man, you don't need a golf lesson. You need to go and like play on a Monday. You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah,
need to
yeah, yeah,
get to
for
the
sure.
golf course quickly. But like this is another opportunity, right? Because what we can do within the force plates or whatever other piece of technology, but we're obviously talking force plates here. But what we're able to do, man, is we can dig in and actually look at how that player created the movement to stripe that shot, right? And then what we can do is we can actually, in my opinion, start looking at, the overall pattern of the shot that this player creates. And it's like, yeah, you know what? You absolutely flush it 20 out of 100 times with that particular pattern. And that's pretty good, right? The problem, though, is that your magnitude on the mishits is huge and you like make a double or triple and make a real mess of the hole, right? So
For
I
sure.
think that's where the plates really set us apart because instead of being forced into just looking at, oh, that was a good shot, I guess the swing was pretty good. Now we can actually dig a little bit deeper and see, hey, did they kind of time that one up well and get kind of lucky with the delivery of the club? Or did they actually move in a kind of efficient and effective way?
Right. I mean, I use the plates and other technology too, like 3D technology
Yeah, of course.
for benchmarking performance. If I've got a player who's like, yeah, man, I'm super stoked with the way I'm playing, like, whether they're a mini tour player or like, Nick is an example or whatever, um, you know, I need to know, okay, when that player is playing really, really well, when they're leading, when they're leading the tour and approach green, strokes gained. Okay, that week, what were they doing? Were they 30% on a horizontal Y lead foot, or were they 22%? And then when they come back in, I want to look at that and say, hey, you had a really tough week last week. Let's take a look and see where that kind of key performance indicator is. Is it higher or lower? Let's maybe feel like we can get it back to that number that we know works really well for you. And it's astonishing at like, that disease of more that Pat Riley talks about, right? It's like more is not always better, right?
No.
So in the case of like, in our world, like verticals, everybody wants more and more verticals. It's like cool, but oftentimes we're going to see that get way too shallow with a 7-iron. I don't want you to be at 220% of your body weight, even though you can create it. I don't want it because it gets that club moving in an upward fashion too quickly, and you tend to like hit some thin, skanky ones, right? Okay, cool. I know that you're going to operate way better at 190%. Let's get the feelings of how to do that.
Yeah.
And knowing where a player performs their best is as important for good players as making change for the players that need that change and how to understand, how human performance and human movement works. Right. So that,
Yeah.
that benchmarking aspect, I think, is really underrated. I mean, we do the same thing with like a TrackMan or a quad, right? Like, with your TrackMan, that if a player is playing really well, maybe that face to path relationship always stays within 1 degree. And then they come in and like, man, I was really struggling. Okay, well, face to path is super variable, but in the thing, these 5 shots, we're seeing a 3 degree separation from your highest to your lowest. It's tough to play golf that way at your level. A 10 handicap might be really stoked with a 3 degree
Yeah,
difference.
you're
And they
killing
come
it.
in and they come in at an 8 degree difference. You know what I mean?
Right.
But we
Right.
always know if we know when that player is playing really well, we really do know what's happening, A, with club delivery, B, with ball flight, and C, with the human movement, right? And we can
Yeah.
just try to scale that player back to where they are.
The thing that I think is really, a tough go for guys like us is, we get into the weeds and I mean, we really haven't yet, but when we get into the weeds, the language definitely, um, it definitely changes, right? And it definitely gets a little more technical and a little bit more medical grade, let's call it. So, I think a lot of people think that a lot of the concepts that we're trying to explain to people are very technical and difficult to understand and learn. But in fairness to that person, I would argue that the reason that we have to have this technology isn't because we can't see this or figure this out like we talked about earlier. Rather, it's to kind of include the player and be able to show them. I think it's powerful stuff, man, being able to show somebody just their pressure shift. And like I
Mm-hmm.
know that there's force plate users out there that just talk tons of smack about, pressure mats. But I think there's a lot of good that you can learn out of just a pressure mat, right? I think that there's tons of valuable information there. Where does the pivot go? You can figure that out on a pressure mat. So
For sure, for sure, for sure.
like I think that, a lot of times people think that to your point, like it's just we're going to give them more information and more things to think about. And the one thing that I am 100% certain of, is when people play well, they think less, not more.
There's a definite correlation to how, how blank you can leave your mind and how well you can play, for sure. But we don't want to let that, let's call it automation of skill, get in the way of skill acquisition, right? So
Right.
like the analogy that I always use to talk to players about this, because everybody wants automation of skill like immediately, right? Like everybody. And I'm like, for people who have kids out there or are young enough to remember when they learned how to drive, your parents did not just hand you the keys to the car and say, see ya. You had to go to driving school, and then you had to pass a written test, and then you had to pass a driver's test. And at least, I grew up in Ontario. You couldn't have a drink in your system until you were 22. You had to have another licensed driver in the car for a year. You weren't allowed on major highways. Why? Because you're stupid. You don't know what you're doing, right? You
Right.
have no idea. You have to take in all that stimuli. You have to anticipate what other drivers are doing. You have to drive your own car. You have to do all that stuff. Now, is that hyper technical? Maybe. I mean, it could be life and death situations on the road, right? So it's pretty important stuff. Eventually, though, you and I can hop in our car, do a conference call, eat a sandwich, drink a coffee, listen to a podcast, shut our brain off completely, and arrive at our destination without harm 99.9% of the time. And that's skill automation, right? We had to learn it though. So, I try to get to people where it's like, yeah, conscious thought's a really great idea on the range. 100%. I want every rep to be as consciously focused as
Amen.
humanly possible. I want you to be videoing your golf swing, because once we're on force plates and we know, okay, this is what it's kind of supposed to look like. Okay, that's the box we're operating in. Don't be scared of conscious thought. You can't learn a skill by thinking
Ignoring
about it.
it.
Or like,
Yeah.
I can't watch a YouTube video on how to fix my radiator in my car and then be like, oh, I know how to fix a radiator. I don't know how to fix a radiator, right? I can't even get my car up off the ground. I can't barely change a flat tire, for God's sake, let alone fix my rad. So like, I can watch all the content I want, but the application of that and then the automation of that is like wildly, wildly different, right?
Correct.
So, and to your point about like complicated terms, it's like, yeah, like it's complicated information. My job is to make it easy though, right? That's my
Right.
job. It's to understand the fields, the drills, all that kind of stuff. But, I tend to use really complicated language.
I
I
had two
tend to make,
professors in the whole
yeah.
time I was in college. By the way, it took me about 8 years to get an undergrad degree. So real smart guy here. But my buddy got his dental or his doctorate degree when I got my undergrad. We went to school at the same time. But long story short, I had
you had you had more fun though, Michael. You had more fun.
I definitely had more fun.
Yeah.
Uh paying for it now. But anyway, long story short, I had two professors that really left a lasting impact on me. And it was funny because you would go to the lecture and these guys would make this stuff look so simple. I mean, it was just like, oh my God, like this is probably what I should do with my life because this makes so much sense. And then you would like go, leave the class, go get something to eat, go back to, well, I didn't, but most people go back to the library and study. And you crack the book, man, and it might as well be written in Mandarin because it doesn't make any sense. And it's just amazing at how people that truly, have the knowledge, right? That's a big part, like we're talking about. Like you got to have good concepts to work with. So you have to have the knowledge base. But then you also have to have this thing called the application, right? And you've got to be able to do something with that knowledge. And then when you really get the good stuff, you wind up with wisdom, right? When you're able to put those two things together kind of harmoniously, you get some wisdom, and then that leads to mastery of that skill, like you're talking about, being able to drive to work and do all these things, and nothing ever happens because it's on autopilot and you're good at doing this. But those two guys really had mastery of the subject. They had real life experience. They hadn't just watched a bunch of content and read a few books and got a t-shirt, right? Like they had lived
Yeah.
it, died with it. They had done everything there was, and they really had mastery. And what made them masters, like I just described, was being able to take something that I didn't know anything about and make it seem like it was like my right hand. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they just really have the ability to take really massive amounts of complex information and just distill it down to like, hey, simple. It's real simple. Do this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
to your point, I think that a lot of people are shocked, but they'll come in for a golf lesson with me and like they get a 60 question evaluation before they even show up, right? Like there's a lot of stuff I need to know. And if you're
Yep.
working on my program, then you're doing some precision breathing work with NeuroPeak Pro, right? We're making sure
Yep.
that we're learning how to control that because obviously, like you can't outthink a parasympathetic response. So, right. So
Yeah.
we got to kind
Yeah.
of learn, especially for young people, it's really important. We're also doing cognitive function training with our clients, meaning that they're doing this visual edge assessment, doing this training online because your eyes have 9 cognitive skills they're responsible for. So, like a hardware test in terms of what your ophthalmologist does is not really useful for this setting. But like I've seen people come in and like it doesn't matter whether they have a rangefinder or not, their depth perception is so poor that they just have no idea how far the target is away, and you can't make them believe it because that's what they see. So
For
like
sure.
being able to fix those, like it's a holistic approach, though, is what I'm getting at, right? It's
For
not
sure.
just
For
looking
sure.
at like, hey, the club does X, the ball does Y. This is, we're not trying to make these broad assumptions.
Right. And I mean, for what you do, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, but like you're a coach, right? You're fully responsible for that player's performance.
Yep.
Right. So, and again, those things are awesome because, like, I know for myself as a player, I struggle with depth perception. I'll play with my buddies. We'll go on a golf trip every year and I'll play with my buddies and we'll find a dog leg to the right. And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to roast it at that tree and turn it over. And I hit draws everywhere. And I'll hit it at that tree and it won't draw. And it's like 50 yards out of bounds. They're like, why are we hitting it over there? I'm like, well, it's like 300 yards. I can't fly it
No,
there. So
it's
I'm just
not.
going
It's
to turn it off.
220.
Exactly, right. And my depth perception like sucks. So I use my rangefinder from everywhere outside of 30 yards. And I get made fun of for that. But like I know the difference between 30-yard carry distance with a lob wedge and 35.
Okay.
I'm not good
So
enough
I
to know
love the fact
32
you're
and
different.
34, but
I'm going to coach
you
you
know,
up right here. You ready? I
yeah.
love the fact you're different. And this is me talking to a player right now. Dude, I don't care if you have to use that rangefinder from the front. You do you, right?
Right.
Because the
Yeah.
one thing that I will tell you, and you're being kind, you spend probably more time around tour players than I do. But I one thing I am convinced of, man, is there is not one single player on the PGA Tour who is anywhere near normal. Every one of these guys is at least 2 clicks off standard deviation, man. Like every one of them. Like, and I say, do you, man? Like,
Yeah,
if your depth perception sucks, you better use that rangefinder. Because I would
for
rather look
sure.
like a nerd out there using my rangefinder and winning the trophy than looking like a nerd out there using my rangefinder and not winning the trophy. So make your peace with it.
100%, right? Like
You know
I'm
what I
I'm a
mean?
big basketball fan, and like to Malcolm Gladwell's point, like why didn't Shaq or any of these terrible free throw shooters like Giannis like throw it under him? Like it's an ego thing, right? And you put your ego aside if you want ultimate performance.
They say
Whether
that
that's
somebody I heard this stat somewhere. I don't know if it's true or not, but this is the internet, so it doesn't matter. But like I heard this stat that like something like they think like 30% of like homicide murders happen because somebody didn't want to be impolite. Like the person that ends up murdered like knew something was up before like the actual murder
oh
situation, but like
yeah,
didn't
I
want
buy
to be
that.
like, hey, leave me alone. You know what I mean? And make a scene early enough. They let it go too far because
Yeah,
they
yeah,
didn't want
yeah,
to be like, because people don't want to stick out, man. You're exactly right. Like everybody
for sure.
wants to be part of the tribe.
That's right. I mean, we have a herd mentality, right?
Right, of course.
And that sometimes serves us pretty well, and sometimes like really hurts us. And to your point about using a rangefinder or all these other coaching ideas, I'm lucky, man. I don't have to deal with any of that, right? My job is easy. My job is like, hey, what's the technical part of the equation that I'm missing, right? So like in the case of Nick, it was, hey, I hit 2 or 3 shots a day that double cross, and nobody can tell me why I do it. And I was like, oh man, like licking my chops at this, like this is going to be
Yeah.
great. And we basically had to find a needle in a haystack that isn't visible through the eye. And we said, okay, well, like here's, can we see it's a little underplaying? Yeah. Can we see that in like in TGM kind of terminology? Are we running out a little bit of right arm a little too soon? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But why? Right? Anybody can probably see that, but why are we
Yeah.
behaving that way?
Go another level
So
deep, right?
right. And we looked at it and we're like, okay, like this is why. And all of a sudden, like, boom, like, he came in here hitting zero path with a slightly closed face, trying to fade it. I'm like, well, there's your double cross, bro. Like, I don't know why nobody can tell you this. Let's find out why we square
So
that
he
up
was
too much.
basically trying to manage that through dynamic lie.
Basically, right? And he was
Yeah.
he hit slightly up on it, pretty square, and with a slightly closed face. And I'm like, well, there's your recipe for 20 yards left, like all
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And he would aim left edge and hit it in the left rough. And he told me, he's like, I think it cost me like a couple $100,000 a year. And his best year on tour was just a shade under 2 million, and he made just a shade over 7 million this year. So I was like, I don't know if it's costing you a couple $100,000, it might be costing you a few million a year.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, for my relationship with any player, whether it is a good player here, whether it's Nick, whether it's a Mackenzie Tour player, it doesn't matter who it is. It's all about how can that player accomplish what they want, right? And for a coach, you have to start to set the tone of what that player needs. You have to set the expectation. You have to set the game plan. You have to set, okay, this is why I think this, and you need the buy-in from the player. Fortunately for me, to some degree, I don't do any of that. I let the coach and the player come to that conclusion, and then I try to give them the technical know-how of how to hit the golf shot they want. So if I get a player who wants to turn it over both directions off the tee, they need to know, okay, here's my anatomical structure, here's my movement pattern, here's whatever, to me, it's a lot of neck tilt, eye line, ball position type of stuff, pretty easy stuff. Now, do I always like that player is going to want to turn it over both ways? I subscribe to a little bit of the decade philosophy where I'd rather see players hit it one direction off the tee.
Yep.
I don't always like it, but it's my job
Players
to make sure
play,
that the
man.
coach and the player get they want. And I always say, like, if I told Bubba Watson he could win 5 more times on live, but he could only hit one ball flight, he'd tell me to take a hike. If I told DJ he could win 5 more times, win another 50 million on live tour, but he needed to learn how to turn over the driver, he'd be like, nah, I'm out. See you later. Right? It just isn't going to happen. Right. So there's players. And if I told Tiger, hey, you have to hit this one specific golf shot, I probably would have limited Tiger. Now, not all of us have Tiger's skill set, right? Not all of us have Tiger's feel and the innate ability to create and see curvature. So for some of us, it's way better. The math works out in Scott's point, like Scott Fawcett's point, but the math works out better to hit one standard golf shot and play through strategy, not through shape. But that's not my job. It's not my job to tell a player what they should do. It's my job to tell them how to do what they want to do, and let the chips fall where they will.
Absolutely.
Where you're definitely a little bit more responsible for all the other stuff.
Well, it's different, right? And like, I want to be fully transparent, and I want to give you credit because you kind of helped me understand and shape, how my working with, let's say tour players, better players, tour players, whether it be Korn Ferry, PGA Tour, LPGA, whatever, right? When I work with a lot of the tour players, as a matter of fact, I don't have anybody that I'm the primary coach for on the tour right now. I don't have one single player that I'm the primary coach for. And I'll be honest, I kind of have backed out of that role because, to your point, if you're going to be a full-time coach on the PGA Tour, in my opinion, and you're going to wear the coach's hat and you're going to be the service provider and find the people to support, because it's not a one-man job anymore. There's just too many variables that you're trying to control. So if you're going to be that person, you need to be with that player pretty much full-time. And I
100%.
have other interests and I have other things I do. So I've kind of taken the plumber model out there on tour, right? To where, I'm a very good plumber and my tools cost a lot of money for me to get them out of the truck. So here's the deal. Like, you're going to pay me like the best plumber in town, because I like to believe I am, but you're going to pay me to fix the leak. You're not going to pay me every time it doesn't leak. So I don't work off percentages. I don't do any of that stuff. And like you said, man, like, I show up and like the coach is already there, right? The player's already there. They're already screaming and yelling at each other and can't figure out why whatever's happening is happening, right? And then like I'm kind of like the peacemaker, right? And I go, hey, neither one of you are wrong. You're saying the same thing, but like, let's look at it from this perspective and see if this doesn't kind of jive with what you guys are trying to say, right?
For
And
sure.
then it's like, oh my God, like now there's some harmony. Now we can actually get, back to like playing golf. But
We can get some work done. If we can
important.
come on the same page, we can actually work. Right? When you're reading 2 different books, like, it's not, you can't have the same conversation.
Right.
You need to be reading the same book on the same page to actually start to have that conversation with a player. For me, it's all about that role that we fill, right? So for me, like, I never wanted to be Greg Popovich or Phil Jackson. It's too much stress, man. There's too many variables that go into playing really high level golf. Your nutrition. So the couple of years that I spent out on the Mackenzie Tour, or the Canadian Tour back then, doing tour support for their players, where I met like Tony and JJ and Hugo Leon and a bunch of really great players. Like, I would be, as a single guy, I would be out maybe late on a Thursday night at a restaurant or an establishment, and I would see guys out there closing down the bar,
Yeah.
who play on Friday morning, and I'm like, man, like, don't you play early tomorrow? And they're like, man, I shot 74 today, like, I'm done. I'm like, That's weird. Can't you go shoot 66 tomorrow and make a cut and make a paycheck? Right. So we have like how to travel as a professional. We have how to eat. We have short game and all the different variables that go in expectation management, fitness, all this different stuff that goes into playing golf. And I got to be honest, to me, it has always felt disingenuous to tell somebody who can be 17 under par on the 71st hole what they should be doing from a game plan, because I've never been that guy, right? I'm a two handicap, one or two handicap. I'm a pretty decent player. I've never been really great. I'm probably better now than I have been in a long time since I was a kid. And the fact of the matter is like, it just doesn't make sense for me to tell a PGA Tour player how they should be doing, what they should be thinking, all that kind of stuff. I would be literally recycling other people's ideas and what they've told me, right? Like what Mark Blackburn says and what good nutritionists say and all this different stuff. And it's always felt a little disingenuous. Do I have a really good idea of how to technically move the golf ball the way that they want to? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I do. I can do that with some real good confidence.
Yeah.
So I want to be the nerd in the background who teaches like Ben Simmons how to shoot. I don't want to have to do game plan setting picks for players to run off of and how to scheme defenses and how to do all this stuff. I just want to be the nerd who teaches Ben Simmons how to shoot.
Honestly,
That's my
man, like
ultimate dream job, by the way.
I
I
think
would
it's
love to
hilarious
do
to hear
that.
you say this because I really hope that there are a lot of my friends and colleagues listening to this episode in particular, man, because I've been getting roughed up, man, because like there for a minute, there was a lot of opportunity coming my way and there was a lot of like, pretty good players coming through the door and all that stuff and well-known names and what have you. And like all of a sudden, like it was almost like somebody turned off the spigot. And all my boys are like, dude, is everything okay? Like, are you not doing what? And I'm like, yeah, man, I just don't know if that's for me. To your point, man, it's like I couldn't have said it more exactly. Like I'm playing, to probably about a 3 right now because I haven't been playing very much, 3 or 4 probably. I can play pretty well. I am hitting it as far as I've ever hit it. Like all those things are good. I'm playing better. But to your point, man, it's like when you're out there and you're kind of like responsible for, let's say a 22 to 30-year-old and you're trying to tell them how to beat the world and you've never beat the world yourself. It's like, like there's a lot of rah and I've kind of made some peace with it in a couple moments to where it's like he hasn't been here either. So, at least 2 heads put together is better than one. And,
For
like
sure.
that's kind of how I've guess I've made my peace with it from time to time. But, I think what you said on the backside of that is just brilliant, man, because the people who are really good, and you brought up some great people, Mark Blackburn, unbelievable, man. The success that guy's having at the tour level. I mean, he's got 4 people in the Ryder Cup, man. It's unreal.
Right.
Um,
But he
you
doesn't
know,
do it by himself, right? And
no,
I don't know Mark personally. I've seen him speak a bunch of times. I don't know Mark personally. But I know that he's not doing it himself. I know that he uses fitness guys. And I know that
he
there's
has a whole
other
team.
people
Yeah.
on Max's team and whoever's team, right? I had a conversation with Craig Davies, who's a tour athletics guy
Yeah.
based out of Orlando. And we were talking about Nick, and I was saying, hey, I'm having a real problem getting him to perform this task that I want him to do because we're chasing a little bit of ball speed over the offseason. And I was like, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I want to do. How do we relate that to what you're doing? What have you seen from that athlete that says, hey, like maybe that's a good idea, maybe it's not? And he informed me on some tendon durability that Nick doesn't have, some explosiveness that he doesn't kind of currently lack. So Craig put him on an 8-week program. He's like, I think you'll be able to see an improvement in what you want come 6 or 8 weeks as long as Nick does the work. So my conversation with Nick we're going to continue to chase the consistency, the ball striking side of things, but you need to do Craig's work. And then we're going to go revisit this come 8 weeks from now.
Absolutely.
And that's how teams work, right? I don't know what Craig knows. I don't know what Joe Mayo knows. And Joe is doing some great work on putting a bunch of stuff out online that he's been doing with Hovland lately. And I
Thank
think it's
God.
really great for coaches to understand, right?
Me too.
But I don't know what those guys know. And I'm not interested in knowing what those guys know. I don't want to know how to do every single thing. I want to know how to do one thing really, really, really well. And when I narrowed that focus down for myself, I got just a lot better at what I do. Trying to
100%,
learn,
man.
trying to keep up on putting, trying to like, I'm behind, I don't know, a dozen paywalls or so. So trying to keep up on like Phil Kenyon's putting stuff and then looking at all the aim point stuff. And I do that for my own game. But trying to like maintain all of those things is literally a full-time job. I could literally spend 8 hours a day
Yeah.
online consuming information right now. might make me a better coach. It might make me more knowledgeable across the board, but not really interested. And I got to make money. So I got to work at some point. I can't just consume information, right? I can't just go to
The hard
school for
part,
this
man.
stuff,
Now you're
right?
getting into the
I got to make
business.
some dough.
Yeah, like
So,
now it's not all
you
fun
know,
and games.
no, I mean, so narrowing the focus allows me to say, okay, well, I need to keep up to date on, what you're talking about and what Scott Lynn's talking about and what Steve Furlonger is talking about and what biomechanics like Mark Bull are talking about, right? I need to keep up on that stuff.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I can just, I mean, do I look at Joe's stuff for my own game? Yeah. Do I teach it to people? I haven't taught a short game lesson in years. I don't do any of that stuff. So for me, it's like I'll still try to keep up to date on what's happening in the world, but my focus is like crazy, crazy narrow. And it allows me to just get to the nuts and bolts of what I can do. And I can tell a player, like, listen, man, I can't help you. And that's okay. Right. It took me a while to come to grips with that, but it's okay that I can't help.
Maturity, right? It's just maturity. That's all it
For
is.
sure.
I think so. I mean, I think it shows that, you get to a point, man, and you just kind of realize, like, I at least spent most of my younger life trying to be the one guy left standing on top of the mountain. And you kind of realize that that's a young man's dream, right? And it's kind of not true because, I think the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary is incredible on Netflix. Whether you're an Arnold fan or not, I think it's incredible. The man's like had it's unreal what he's accomplished in his life.
Yeah.
But like he is very adamant at the end of it, and he's like basically like, "Don't call me a self-made man. I'm not self-made. Like I had
Right.
a lot of help."
Right.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
for sure.
and it's true, right? Because I don't think that I don't think a Rory, let's say, there could be a young, 16, 17, 18-year-old Rory out there. Probably is. There's probably 20 of them, maybe more, but they're out there, right? And if those guys unfortunately don't get the right kind of help and learn to develop the skills that are needed to play at the highest of levels, not just the skill itself to play, but the other skills you have to surround with that. I mean, they just never develop and they never get to the point where they can shoot that 66 and make a paycheck. And like, they just never learn how to be a professional.
For sure. I've got a guy who came and saw me about a month ago, and he's 17, just turned 17. He's a +5. He has 18 hole-in-ones. Check that out. Like, that's insane to me.
Impressive.
I don't have a single one. My wife
Come
reminds me of
on.
that every time because she has one. But I had this kid in, and he's never taken a golf lesson. He's like, I just played with good players. I kind of mimicked. He has kind of a self-made move. We talked about, okay, what makes it good, what makes it maybe not as repeatable as we'd like to see, but as a +5, it's pretty darn repeatable.
Right.
And he was like, what should the next steps be? I was like, okay, well, here's the guy that I would recommend in the Lower Mainland for like coaching. Here's the guy that I would recommend to go see for putting. Here's the guy that I would recommend to go see short game. Here's the guy I would recommend to go see about like your mental performance, right? Here's the guy that I would go talk to about nutrition. Here's your physiotherapist. It was 6 different people. Here, and I sent out emails introducing and linking them all up. And it's like, these guys can help you, right? I can do this little sliver of information for you. And here are the 6 names that I think are kind of the best that you can get to readily available in our area. Or, the one guy for putting, I definitely told him to fly out somewhere. And I said, here is the crew of guys that I would absolutely trust. And not because they're all PGA Tour coaches or anything like that, because they're really smart.
They're,
like the physio that I
they're
use,
probably not on the list and all that. Yeah, it's
for sure.
Those aren't the people.
Right. And I'm looking for smart, passionate people who I know can help, who will definitely stay within their stream. Right. I want a player to go to a club fitter who's not going to recommend, you're only 2 up, so I'd like to see you more. Well, there's a reason that player's 2 up.
5 up.
It's because they hit more
RPMs.
fairways.
That's going to be great for you.
Right. And then when I toe hook it, it's 1,000 RPM going dead ass left. I'm like, there's a reason that player's 2 up. He hits more fairways at 2 up or keeps it in front of him more often at 2 up. I want him at 2 up. I don't need a fitter telling him, if you went to 5 up, you'd spin it less and you'd hit it further. Right. It's not the goal. So I want a team around players that are going to stick in their lane. And not that other people can't have different disciplines, but the guys that I'm looking for are going to do very specific things really accurately for a player. Right.
So here's how I would describe you. Yeah. And I would describe myself very much the same way. I don't like the word expert, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there because while I don't believe I'm an expert, I mean, me and you, there's Dr. Scott Lynn. There's a few guys from a couple of the other force play communities, but there's not very many of us. There's like maybe 15 of us that are really getting into this every single day.
For sure.
So I'm going to go ahead and say that we've kind of at this point are at the expert level with the force plate stuff as best we know it so far. But I think that you have the ability, even though you don't do it, you do have the ability to triage, just like I have the ability to triage, right? And like that's
For sure.
kind of what I want to be really good at is I want to be able to triage in the moment until I can get them to that person on the team that this is their thing. And that's really, I think, the art of coaching, right? Is learning how to be a really good triage specialist. And like I still have to do my job with the force plates. Like when I'm the coach in that role, to your point, like this is what I'm here to do. Like this has got to be perfect always. But in those other capacities, I'm definitely more of the triage guy until we can get you to the person that's really going to be able to make the most impact.
For sure, right? And
And I
I think
think for
I think
us
that's
too, real quick, because I do want to get to this before we run out of time today, but I think the biggest thing that you probably provide with the force plates and I provide with the force plates is I think that a lot of people probably walk away from an experience with you and from an experience with me, and they probably feel like they violated a lot of the things they thought they knew or thought they should be doing. Because I think that what we really have the ability to do by showing people what can't be seen with the naked eye is we really get them to challenge their concepts and we really get them to challenge what they think they should be doing, right? And that's very much that conversation around feel and real. And I get frustrated at that conversation because I see people say that all the time, but I don't see a pressure mat or a force plate anywhere to be seen. And I really think when we're talking about the differences between feel and real, we're talking about those forces and torques being exchanged between the feet and the ground, because I think that's what we feel because it's obviously a larger force center than the one happening at the hands. So, with all that being said, I think that the reason that we're really seeing this massive conceptual change in terms of how to hit a golf ball is what we started talking about before we came on air to shoot this thing, which was, a lot of the books, man, that people come in and quote to me every day, just like they come in and quote to you every day, even though we're in two different countries. Most of those books were written pre 1999. And a
for
lot of
sure.
things changed, right? We got a TrackMan, which really helped us understand the 9 ball flights a little bit better. And most
Hmm.
importantly, we stopped playing with a Balata golf ball.
For sure. That Balata golf ball, the combination of high lofted golf clubs and a Balata golf ball still influences a huge number of golfers today. So the concept that the way that a lot of players picture the golf swing, the way they think about it, is absolutely colored by the way that they used to play or by what they've consumed, the way their dad taught them, right? I have these couple of kids who play, or young guys who play over at a local club that I go work at once a month or so. And their dad has taught them. And I saw one of them, and then he started to play better. And then I saw the other son, and he started to play better. And then finally the dad came in and he told me, he's like, I feel like you've told my kids that I taught them wrong. I was like, no. I'm like, you taught them the best you could. So, but the things that you've taught them are no longer applicable, right? So we were chatting about this a little bit. You take a high lofted golf club, you take a Balata golf ball. So we have one thing that's going to make the golf ball go high, but we have a golf ball that isn't designed to launch high, right? So for anybody out there who's not used to playing a Balata or can't remember it, that Balata used to have to sizzle close to the ground, right? That old kind of out and up ball flight. So the launch angle had to be crazy, crazy down. So what do we see from a lot of that era of players? We see a lot of knee drive close to the ground. We see a lot of lag angle, quote unquote lag angle, radial deviation, whatever you want to kind of talk about. And we see a lot of trapping motion. Well, we play a golf ball now that's designed to be launched straight up in the air, right? We play lower lofted golf clubs, right? So now those things that we kind of color our conception or our belief about a golf swing, they kind of no longer apply. Now, that's not to say that the Jim Flicks of the world and whatnot were wrong.
They
Golf My
weren't.
Way or whatever by Jack, like it's not wrong. It's just no
No.
longer applicable. So up here we play a lot of hockey. I don't even know how to skate. I'm a terrible Canadian. But
The
talking to
one
smart
Canadian that
people,
can't skate.
I know, right? I'm a basketball and baseball guy. I don't know. So when
We'll
we used
adopt
to
you.
play a wood stick, you had to hit the ice like an inch behind the puck,
Yeah.
right? So you take these older school guys in the 80s and they were hitting wood sticks close to the puck. Now you take a composite stick, and apparently, again, I'm using good hockey players as my analogy here. They take a composite stick and they hit the ice about a foot behind the puck. Okay, now so they've changed one component of the delivery system. They've changed the club essentially, right? Now imagine changing the puck as well. That delivery system would have to then go through another radical kind of change. And that's where we're at with golf clubs. We have lower COGs, we have stronger lofts, we have different shafts, and we play a golf ball that's designed to launch 180 degrees differently than what it used to be done. So the golf swing has to be modernized. So a lot of the time when I get, guys kind of my age and above who played with Pilates, it's like, okay, well, we have to modernize the golf swing, which takes to your point of like myth busting. A ton of what I do is just understanding, okay, this is what I think. Okay, you're actually doing what you think. I want to have 90% of my pressure on my lead foot when I hit the golf ball. Okay, it's not what I see from the best players in the world.
Nope.
But you're doing it and you're struggling because you're doing it.
Right.
You weigh more at impact than you did in any point during your downswing, body weight wise. And it's mostly concentrated on your lead foot. It's a really bad recipe for your back. So we see a lot more back injuries in the 80s and 90s than we do today. Will Zalatoris kind of excluded. It's like, yeah, you're accomplishing exactly what you want to do, but your concept's off. So we have to go ahead and just modernize, myth bust a couple of things. Maybe I want pressure to accelerate off that lead foot a little bit more to get that player to work upwards a little bit more, which pulls the handle up, which shallows AOA, which launches the golf ball up in the air. And all of a sudden they go from these trappy kind of 60-foot high draws to these nice 105-foot apex flighted things that go 25 yards further. Didn't add any speed. Conscious speed. We didn't add any effort to create more speed. We allowed that athlete to work better.
Force plates would, in my opinion, force plates would be absolutely worthless without a launch monitor. Like if you were just standing out on a driving, well, the fun thing is like I can't, and you know this because you do it too, but literally, I'm in Michigan and we have a ton of hockey guys up here, and I'm always the guy complaining about left-handed hockey players, and it's like, when you have knives on your feet, you can't create any torque or you fall on your face. These guys are massive horizontals because, to your point, they slap the ice way before the puck. So, low point doesn't really matter for those guys. Like,
sure.
So, long story short, it's amazing to me how you watch one of these guys like tee off and just smack the heck out of one with a little bit of torque for the first time in their life and a little bit of rotation, right? And then the next thing you know, it's like they look up at you and like, man, that's going to be good when we can like swing hard at that. And you look at, the club speed. I like to look at club speed with these guys because ball speed you can manipulate in a lot of different ways. But, club speed's just raw horsepower, right? And it's like you look at that and it's like, oh, it's up 5 miles an hour. Well, I didn't feel like I did anything. And the analogy that I always use with these guys is like, hey, if we went over to our gym here and put 200 pounds on the bench press, you might do it 3 or 4 times and that's great. But if I put the same exact 200 pounds on a leg press, we're going to be here for 2 weeks watching you do this. So like, when you use the leg, i.e. the ground, but when you use the legs, all of a sudden, the effort level, let's call it, really seems to drop because you're not using the smaller muscle chains, you're actually using the big ones.
For sure. And watching players, I know that the best compliment I get paid all the time is that I feel more athletic.
Yep, I get it. Yep.
Perfect. That's the best compliments that somebody can pay me, because what they've been doing, like maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, whatever. But when we get them to move in a fashion that allows them to kind of reach their untapped potential, oftentimes it just feels more athletic, right? And I'm like, well, good, golf's a sport, right? We maybe haven't always taught golf as a sport, and I think it's really important.
That's where I think the bifurcation's coming, Ryan. I'm so happy you said that because I was going to forget to get to it with you, but I think that is like they talk about the ball, and I don't really want to get into that because that's something way above our pay grades that they don't listen to us about. But I think the bifurcation of golf is here. I think it's already here. And I think what you're seeing is that the bifurcation kind of falls on the line of, is golf a game or is golf a sport? And, a lot of people that you work with, I would say probably 99.9% of the people that you work with, they're playing a sport, man. They're here, they're committed, they want to get better, they're paying a premium for their coaching experience because you're not cheap, nor should you be. You're very good at what you do. Your technology is very expensive. Same with me. So, they're coming into this from this sport perspective. And honestly, man, I think that so much of golf has been a game for so long, for so many people, that they don't really realize that you could even train it in the way that you would train in a sport fashion. So, I think that that's really where people get a little bit confused, because I don't really think that the quote unquote standard golf lesson from the guy on the back of the range really fits in that sport model, because at the Olympic level, when they train athletes to show up and win medals, they talk about the things we've talked about. They talk about nutrition, they talk about sleep, they talk about strain, they talk about recovery, they talk about all these things that are massively important to the human being so that the human being can perform the sport. And like that's where I really think, man, that we're able to help people, is to go from this very kind of cluttered and nobody cares because it's a game, to really kind of slimming down some of those thought processes and maybe making them a little bit more succinct. And to your point, if we can get the highway with less traffic in it and the system's a little more free and clear to run, hey man, what do you know? When there's less traffic on the 105, you drive a hell of a lot faster.
100%, right? And I mean, to talk about it being a game or a sport, like if a player wants to treat it as a game, they want to
Great.
go and have just a nice
Great.
walk in a park, and they want to shoot 95. Okay, cool, man. Like you don't have to
Awesome.
train like an athlete. Go
Nope.
ahead, go ahead. Like I'm not going to judge somebody's motivation for
You know.
playing the game. Am I going to work with that player? No, because what I'm going to do isn't really applicable to them, right? And that's why, like most of the time, I've got sub 5 handicaps in my studio because they know what I do. It's a congruent kind of thing, and people get a whole lot better. Doesn't mean I can't help a guy who shoots 95. I can.
Yeah.
Am I going to be
You know what?
interested in
Hang on
doing
though.
it if
You know
that player is
why?
not going to be a sport
Why?
or treat
Let's
it like a
change
sport?
this. You help everybody. Okay. Let's get
I do.
that clear. You help everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. But you know why you don't have the same success with the guy that's a 15 that you have with the guy that's a 5? Let's phrase it that way.
Yeah.
You know why you don't have the same success with the 15?
No problem. Well, I would say I have success, but what do you think?
But you don't have the same level of success with the 15 that you do the
For
5,
sure.
right?
For
And the
sure.
reason is really simple. The 5 knows what's up. And the
Yep.
5 is there to learn and accept what you have to say and implement change. And here's the difference. The 5, if you give him a drill to do, when you see him next Wednesday practicing before his lesson, he's doing the drill. And
For
the
sure.
15 won't do the drill more than 2 or 3 swings before they declare that they got it. And like the thing that always cracks me up is I know their handicap based off this alone. When they ask me after, dude, like I said, they get this big evaluation. We do all these things. I put them on, let them warm up on TrackMan. So I got those shots on TrackMan. I've got sports box. I've got plates. I've got everything, dude. And we do
Yeah.
all this. And they're just foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
What's going to be the answer? What's been holding me back all this time? Because they think it's one thing, like everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a 15.
Yep.
Hey, man, at all this. And what I think is actually going to be our best course of action is I actually think we ought to get your posture put together. Oh no, man. No, no, it can't be that, man. No, no, no. Let's talk like angular displacement. Dude, we don't need to talk angular displacement. We need to talk about how far forward your sternum is of your center of mass and why you can't get your facet joints in your back to let your spine extend. Like that's what we actually need to do today.
For sure. You cannot move the graphs on SwingCat, or you can't move faster or more freely from poor position, from poor anatomical structures, man. Like you're sunk. You've sunk your ship before you sailed out of harbor,
Yep.
right? And you have to be able to at least put the body in a functional position. Now that doesn't mean everybody has to be in the same position.
Oh,
It has to be functional for the athlete, right? So the one that I always like to talk about, and if anybody watched the Canadian Open out there, you would have seen a little bit of my fingerprints, which are actually, funny enough, Scott Coates's fingerprints. My
right.
buddy Scott, I always like to give credit.
I love
When
Scott.
Nick would address the golf ball, right, and he was on TV for a long time, the left arm would hang as far, the left humerus bone, so the upper arm bone would hang as far outward as he can before he grips the golf club, because that is an opener. It causes pronation of the lead arm after he changes direction of the golf swing, which allows him to not hit it to the left. So part of his pre-shot routine is hang that thing over. Now, if I don't do that with him, he still sneaks it left from time to time. He has to be very precise of that position of that bone in order to create the golf shot at that level. Most people have no concept of where their humerus or their upper arm bones are in their golf swing at setup. And we see that all the time through outside steepening guillotine type of planes. Is that humerus, the trail arm humerus is up and out, like it's internally rotated and outward.
Yep.
Now, a lot of players, when we see that, they've actually rotated it inwards at setup.
Yep.
This does not work. It just straight up doesn't work. So we have to be able Oh, shit. Okay, hold on. Sorry, Michael, one sec. Sorry. We have to make sure that that player is going to put themselves in a position that allows them to perform the task that they want, right? And
Absolutely.
that's
And
the
I mean,
key. That's the real key.
but that's,
And
that's
and if we
once
don't
again
get
going
that
deep.
structure right, then movement doesn't matter,
But that's
right?
once again going deep. And I don't mean deep in regard to, this is so deep that it can't be usable, but it's called doing your job as your coach and like actually understanding the puzzle that you're looking at, right?
one Hundred
And like
percent.
when it comes to, and this is where it gets interesting, right? People always say, well, if I had Tiger as a client, I would be a great coach. And, I guess if you're basing your results off your players' successes, then yeah, you would be a great coach if you were Tiger's coach. But at the end of the day, man, like people say that all the time, but I watch coaches all the time get with better players and freeze because it gets harder. And the better they are, man, the harder it gets to coach them because it's not this low hanging fruit that you could just see a mile away or from the other side of the driving range, right? And that's why there's guys like you and guys like myself who are like not in the lab, but kind of in the lab behind the scenes, really digging and kind of teasing all of this out because to your point, man, I just don't think that you're going to be able to create the performance that we're seeing currently without really taking these deep dives with these guys. Like I just and I hate to say it, but even for the guy that's a 10 listening to this, you're not going to get better through technique alone. Like at a certain point in golf, like the technique doesn't really like all those guys can hit it. Like every one of those guys on tour can hit it. Every one of those
Yep.
guys can nip one. Every one of those guys, like they might not be able to do it when they need to do it under the gun, and that's what separates them out there, right? But it
Yep.
doesn't mean that they don't have the core competency to do it, right? So like they all have the physical skills and the skill sets to accomplish the goals out there. But at a certain point, man, like, I teach a lot of guys who are good players and, they go on golf trips and have fun, but they're like calling me and texting me, man, I played like shit today. And I'm like, well, aren't you on a golf trip? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, how many beers and bourbons did you have last night? Oh, and it's like they don't even think to equate the fact that they're so hungover that might, have a
Yeah.
consequence on their golf game.
By the way, your Kentucky is showing, eh, with the bourbon.
Yeah, yeah, there you go, right?
We, yeah, no, for sure. Like you slept for 4 hours, hungover. You got to the golf course. You didn't warm up. You hit no putts. You three putted the first three greens because you didn't know what the speed was. You shot 84 and you're normally shooting 81. Okay,
Within the
yeah, like makes
positive
sense.
standard deviation. Okay, sweet.
Like makes total sense, right? So yeah, I mean, and that's where like the performance stuff is so important, right? And credit to all the coaches out there who are getting the best out of their athletes. And I think there's a lot of really great coaches from an instructor standpoint, though, right? Which is what I would call myself. I'm not really a coach, I'm an instructor.
Right.
It really is just, okay, when the environment changes, what changes? Right. So, like, I see players who can do everything I want them to do. And then when that right to left wind kicks up, they don't trust it. Okay. But cool, man. We have technology that we can actually apply wind on to see what the outcome of the golf shot is when that right to win kind of comes in, right? Or right to left win comes in. And we can start to say, okay, well, when that happens, you don't move the same way because you start to get a little scared. You start to guide it. I need you to aim it here and trust exactly what you've built. And that is, I guess, a little bit on the coaching side, but it's still on in the technical bucket as far as I'm concerned,
Right.
because we're still trying to repeat the technical side of things. But it's oftentimes the environment that changes. And when the environment changes, whether it's the breathing gets shallower, the heart rate goes up, the pressure mounts, the wind changes. I've got water on the right, I don't want to hit it over there. When that environment changes, we have to know, okay, where am I aiming, and can I do the same thing over and over and over again? And can I get out of letting the environment dictate my movement? I need to move regardless of the environment. And if we can get the player to do that, man, I mean, Bob's your uncle. Like you're good to go at that point.
Say it all the time, but I love the line from The Departed that Jack Nicholson has. I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me. I love that line,
For
man.
sure,
Like,
for
and
sure. I think
I've
that.
said that to a lot of players on the golf course before, man. And you're exactly right. It's like, if you understand what you do in a simulated environment off of a flat lie, okay, and now the lie is, not flat. How does that
Mhm.
affect the ball flight? Okay,
Right,
where's the wind? How does that affect the ball flight? Okay,
right.
well, your job is to get set up and understand how that lie is going to affect your setup and ball flight. And then to your point, man, you're hitting the same shot you hit in the simulation. It's just you have to aim it different. And it's
You got
just
it, right?
like if you're going to sit there and, look at a pitch shot and try to figure out, like, do I want to open or close the face? Well, guess what? You better not line your feet, quote unquote, square if you're
Mhm.
changing where the face is pointing, because, like, that's kind of important in terms of pitching and chipping and getting the ball on the target line. And
For
it's
sure.
like, it's just understanding. I think what we can do with the plates that's so much different is I think we actually can add, in my opinion, if you think of the golf swing as being, three thirds as a whole, I think that the ground reaction forces is close to two thirds of this equation, man, in terms of what we're doing with the ground. And I get it, man. We've been struggling with this third and I'm just, rounding numbers, but like
Yeah.
we've been struggling at trying to explain why this third happens the way it happens for a long, long time. But you've seen it enough, and I've seen it enough to where when you add the two thirds to the third and you can start looking at the whole freaking story, man, like people can like get better quick.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to put a bow kind of on the force plate kind of conversation is, you know, when a player understands that their pelvis needs to move, right? Your pelvis has to move in your golf swing. We can sway it and slide it laterally. We can thrust it forwards and backwards, and we can elevate it up and down. It's the only directions it can move.
Correct.
It cannot move in any of those directions without ground contact, right? So the analogy I always use: if I go up to block a spike in volleyball, I go straight up in the air. I can then not choose to turn my pelvis, right? I can swing my arms to one side and my pelvis will rotate the other direction, but that's a byproduct of my arms moving, my upper body moving. I can't go straight up and then turn. So if we picture like MJ back in the day doing his little spin moves, or John Morant these days, and they do a 360 and they kind of hang in the air, they've started that torque against the ground before they left the
Way
ground.
earlier.
They
Yeah.
don't jump straight up and then turn.
No, they're
So if the
jumping,
pelvis
twisting from
needs
ground.
to move in the golf swing, the feet have to move the pelvis. So one of the conversations I have with people all the time is, in 3D, especially with like KVS and these older school kind of systems, is we would look at pelvis, thorax, lead arm, and golf club. And out of those three components, absolutely the pelvis moves first for most good players, right? In full game golf shots. Well, what we know now is the pelvis can't move. It's not the first thing that moves. The feet are the first thing that move, right? So we have to start to tie what we're doing against the ground to the pelvis. So I always tell people, I'm like, the last thing I ever want a player to do is rotate. I never wanted to have a player try to rotate. I see all kinds of, like, anybody out there listening that's, probably in the higher handicap buckets. You're trying to rotate, that causes the steepness, that causes the out to in, that causes a bunch of the stuff because you're rotating too quickly at the wrong time, out of sequence, whatever. Instead, I want to act more like a baseball player who strides into towards second base, pushes the ground towards second base, which causes rotation, right? Whether we're doing that on the Y, the X, whatever, it doesn't matter. But we're creating a force that causes the body to rotate. It sounds a lot like semantics, but it's not.
It's
I'm not
not.
trying to rotate. I'm causing rotation to occur.
Yeah.
When I get players to stop trying to rotate and focus more on what their feet do than what their pelvis does or what their chest does, we start to see more
I'm
open
on the
bodies like we see with
blackboard.
tour players,
I'm on the
right?
blackboard with people constantly, man. Like constantly explaining how the foot pronates and supinates. Because you're right, that is the thing that moves first. And it's
I have to.
amazing, man, at what, like you said, I've seen some video of some players who are obviously really good players, and that left knee is so bent at impact, it's unreal. And you're like, that guy must be late as hell. You know what I
Right,
mean? But to your point, when you throw it on the plate, you still see that they're driving that vertical force at the right time. So it's
right.
like, okay, well, obviously that leg is still pretty well connected to the ground, that left foot. And I think that, for so many people, to your point, they're so consumed with moving the golf club and getting the golf club to quote unquote rotate around their body that they just completely lose sight of the fact that this isn't, I mean, it's just a mess in terms of what they're doing with their body. And they're not really creating any of that rotation at all. They're creating that spin out, that we see that all
Mm-hmm.
the time when people try to rotate, they just spin out like crazy. But in
For
terms
sure.
of seeing any kinds of real torque being applied to the ground, it's pretty minimal.
For sure. For sure. And, one thing that I'll never kind of tell people to do is where to swing the golf club from. I'm going to allow movement, because when we look at that time that it takes from top to impact, we're in such a narrow window to move that golf club that I can't move in my old kind of shitty pattern and think, okay, well, I got to move my arms and the club over here. Because, yeah, you can maybe do it on the range with no consequence. You can maybe do it by yourself out on the golf course at 6 p.m. playing by yourself, right? But going on to the first tee on Saturday morning with your buddies and the people watching behind you and all these groups up on the driving range, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. You haven't found it. And that's because you haven't paid attention to how you move and how that influences a golf club. You've moved the same way you always have, early, extended, sliding, swaying, whatever it is, and you're moving that golf club independently. When you lose that connection and that ability, right, we get sunk. Now, if I can create movement that causes the golf club to move into the plane that I want it to move in, well, now when I'm standing over the golf ball, all I got to think about is what I'm doing either at my feet or in my movement pattern. And then the golf club just magically finds its home. And that's a really freeing feeling for a lot of players.
Absolutely,
So
man.
it's
I
all
can't tell
about, for
you,
me, movement and not the golf
if you're
club.
a 15 plus, and I'll be honest, I get a lot of that. I get a lot of 15 plus still. I get a lot of people that kind of, are local people where my facility is, and they don't really realize what this place is, and they just kind of walk through the door and they're like, all right, I'm getting a golf lesson. And they like come in, and I get a good amount of that, man. And I love it because,
Yep.
the first thing I'm doing with a plus, a 15 or higher is I'm taking the golf club out of their hands. It's the very first thing I do. I get rid of the golf club and I start showing them how to pivot that body, right? How to create some extension in the spine. It's not a bad thing. We actually need to create a healthy
Yep.
motion. Like, start really showing them how to move their body, man. Because what I try to help people understand is like, you don't really have the training or the concept for how to move this golf club across time and space. But you do have really good concepts and really good patterns for moving your body across time and space because you've been doing that your whole life. So,
Yep.
like, getting people to start with what they understand in terms of how their body moves throughout the golf swing is way more advantageous to then add the golf club after they understand the body because they feel and interpret that so much better than this golf club that they don't have any clue what the heck it's supposed to do.
For sure. I'm convinced that if we called the golf swing a golf motion, everybody would be better at golf.
I agree.
Right? You,
100%.
you wouldn't be worried about where the shaft is pitching and where the face is, and you're not thinking back here. You're thinking intrinsically or internally, and you're moving to move that golf club instead of moving the golf club and happenstance moving the way that you kind of have ingrained in your movement pattern. So, I if anybody can take anything away from that, start concentrating on what the body does and forget about the golf club. It behaves like a well-behaved dog. If I move well, that dog follows right beside me,
100%.
right?
I agree.
And I've
It
got
doesn't
two poorly
naturally want to
behaved dogs and
twist
they go
itself.
everywhere.
Like face to path isn't happening on its own. Like, you have to create a face to path relate. Like, it doesn't just like go negative or positive. Like, you
Right.
have to do something to create that. Like, it
Right.
doesn't naturally want to flip that way.
And you don't have time to try to square that thing up, man. So that's where
No,
that anatomical structures come in our movement pattern. If we dial those things in, man, like, those things tighten up pretty quickly. So
they do, man. Well, look at that. Like, that almost sounds like we planned this and had like a script and like came to a nice little finish. Like, that was nice. We did good there. I want to really take the time to thank you, Ryan. Like, this has been really good, man. I've really enjoyed it. I appreciate everything, the insights you shared. I don't think we gave you nearly enough credit. Like, obviously, the success with Nick is just incredible. It's such a cool story. I think probably when they do the year-end stuff, I would be shocked if the Canadian Open wasn't a top three story from the tour this year, because it was. And I don't want to take anything away from Nick at all. He obviously got the W, but it was a good showing for Canadians that week. Like, it was, Nick obviously winning was huge, but like, it's a great showing for Team Canada. So,
for
being up in
sure.
Michigan, obviously I'm always pulling hard for my brothers, just a little up north. So, but I want to make sure that you definitely get credit for that. Ryan does an amazing job putting stuff out there online across social media. You can find him at Ryan Holley Golf. You can find his website, Ryan Holley Golf. Definitely worth giving a follow, give a listen. Anytime he's talking about ground reaction forces, you can bet he knows what he's doing because that is definitely the one thing that he has mastered and is an expert in and does an amazing job sharing the information with people. So, with that said, do you got any plugs you need to get in or anything? Or are you good?
No, man, all good. I appreciate that. And, hopefully this helps, a couple of people out there and, start to focus on some of the stuff that I think is more in your control than what the golf club's doing. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Cool. Well, the cool thing too is I think we're aiming maybe at some point in the near future, Ryan and myself are going to try to get our force plates together and we're going to see if we can get them to breed. Because if we could get those to breed, we can make some money, but they're expensive to buy outright. So we're going to see what we can do. But whether we can get them to give us little baby force plates or not, I think we're going to try to do some pretty cool events together in the near future. So
For
if
sure.
you're interested in getting on the Swing Catalyst dual motion plate, you can reach out to Ryan. You can reach out to myself. But we're definitely looking at trying to put together maybe some events that aren't necessarily where we generally are, so that other people also can get access to this amazing technology. So with that said, thank you so much to Ryan for taking the time once again, and I appreciate everybody listening to this episode. As addition to the rebrand, we also will be sharing the video this season, and that video will be posted to the Measured Golf YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find this entire interview with Ryan on our YouTube site. So make sure to subscribe to that page and to like this video. And please leave lots of questions down in the comments. And I guarantee you that Ryan, myself, or both we'll probably get back to you to answer your questions. So thanks again to Ryan. Thanks to everybody for listening, and make sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Until next time, keep grinding.